Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of the Library of NIH Grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you're attending live, just a reminder that you're in listen-only mode, and this whole session is going to be devoted to Q&A for the upcoming deadline. So feel free to start loading your questions into the question and answer box. And if you have a comment that you want to add to the discussion of whatever the topic is, feel free to put that in the comment box as well. So if you're watching this as a recording, and it seems like we have quite a lot of people who are viewing these as recordings. So this is a comment for you guys. Everything that we say today is true to the best of my knowledge as of May 1st, 2024, but things change really quickly at NIH. So I would encourage you always to check the NIH website and check with program officers to make sure that policies are still accurate. What you should be viewing in the library now, we're about a month from what is probably your internal R01 deadline. For many of you, you have to submit your June 5th R01s about 5 business days ahead of time. So hopefully you're putting the finishing touches on your narrative. Hopefully you're not beginning your writing at this point. So I would say maybe watching things like checklists to avoid top mistakes, or maybe going through some of the checklist items in the Master the R Series approach section, or if you're writing a case submission, going through the mistakes commonly made chapter of that. I think that's chapter 8 of the case submission. Any NIH updates? Too numerous to name. So I have mini tutorials mapped out for the upcoming months that have to do with the myriad changes that will be occurring. We're also blogging about some of these changes. So there, as many of you know, there's going to be a change to the scoring criteria coming up that will apply to applications with deadlines on or after January 25th, 2025. So as soon as we go past the October 5th deadline, I'm going to start mini tutorials on those scoring criteria. I'm not doing it before then because NIH has not released all of the information yet. So we're awaiting information on, for example, changes coming to the biosketches and some other things. I'll be attending seminars to learn about. So, so stay tuned for that. A couple of other things in the library. We just released an update to navigate the review process. We will be imminently updating the Master the R Series course. We're all done on our end, and we sent it for CME approval a couple of weeks ago. So that should be coming in any day. So you'll see that Master the R Series update both in the Master the R Series course and as the first 4 chapters of Master the K Series, and also embedded within the NIH grant writing program for those who are using that course. What else can I tell you about those courses? There are more coming, but I'll wait to tell you about those until we're closer. So for those just joining, I see there's a new batch of people who just logged on. This whole session is going to be devoted to Q&A. So feel free to type your questions into the question and answer box. And I'll get started with some of the questions that were emailed to me in advance of this. So one of the questions I got was, will you be covering the simplified review framework? And the answer is yes. I believe those sessions will be coming up. I'll be doing Factor 1 on throughout October. The three Ask the Grant Writing Expert sessions in October will be devoted to the new scoring criteria, 1 factor for each date. Okay, another question that I had was, what is the difference between early stage investigator status and new investigator status? So Early stage investigator status is it's a funding advantage that not all institutes and centers publish what the advantage is, but it typically equates to about a 5 percentage point bump in the funding line. So, for example, if an institute funds, up to the 10th percentile on their R01s, the ESIs would be funded up to the 15th percentile. For some organizations, it's even more than that. I've seen them go up above 10%. Some it's less. So the way that you qualify for that is if you are 10 years or less from your terminal degree, or 10 years from your terminal clinical training. So if you did like a clinical fellowship, whenever that ended, the ESI clock will begin, and you have not been a PI on an R01 or equivalent. New investigator status is you have not been a PI on an R01 or equivalent, but you're more than 10 years out. And the funding advantage tends to be quite a bit smaller than would be for an early stage investigator status. So those of you who have worked with me one-on-one or taken my courses know that I work really hard with my applicants to make sure they're maximizing the number of submissions they can get in while they have the ESI status. Okay, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and keep feeling free to load those up. I'm a new faculty that was previously a staff researcher. I was thinking about applying for a K01, but I only have one publication with a faculty member that could potentially serve as my mentor. Do I need a stronger mentor, or can I have co-mentors that make up for the shortcomings? Or should I rethink applying for a K01? I do think it's mandatory to have that at least one publication with your mentor. You don't mention which institute this is. I find that some institutes like NCI, it's incredibly hard to get a K nowadays. So my sense is I would put in the application. I think it's okay to have one publication if you are first author and your primary mentor is last author, and that publication is in the field in which you are applying for the K01. So whatever the expertise is that you're saying that you need mentoring in, this is a publication that you and your mentor have written together. And then whatever the shortcomings are, can be made up by co-mentors and or advisory committee members. With some exceptions, your primary mentor really, in my experience, has to be on site. I know that we did have somebody a number of weeks or months ago who emailed me and said that they had a K applicant funded on their campus whose primary mentor was not on site. I've never seen that. So I think with an N of 1 on that, and I could name dozens of summary statements where I've seen reviewers complain about that, the primary mentor must be, I think, in my opinion, on your campus, and the closer you are, within the building to them, the better. If you are a clinician, then you would want to make sure that at least one of your mentors is a clinician scientist as well, so they can help you learn how to do that juggle. But I would just put the application in. Statistically, you're not likely to be funded on the first try anyway, so it may be worth just putting the application in and seeing how the reviewers respond to it. So remember also that you can update publication information as post-submission material on the K. You can't do preliminary data. That's only for the R01, R21, and R03 now. But you can update publication information on a K. So I think I answered all of the questions in there. I'm not sure if this is appropriate to ask here, but do we need new letters of support from collaborators and DSMB members for a resubmission of a grant that's initially scored? I don't remember this. I think you do not, especially if it's the same people. I'm pretty sure you do not. But for people who don't know, the DSMB Data Safety and Monitoring Board. So these are people who have agreed to be on the board, but have not yet served because the project hasn't been funded yet. And in reality, I don't even think for some submissions, you don't even have to name the people on the DSMB. It may depend on the NOFO. But I'm pretty sure you don't need new letters, but I would check with your program officer and pre-award support office on that just to make sure. I heard recently as an ESI status for A1 for NHLBI, it says that they give 37 months and the investigator still maintains their ESI. But it mentions that it should be maintained at the time of the funding decision. Do you know of that policy? Thank you. For investigators whose ESI eligibility window expires between, yeah. So this is a policy that applies to, I think, to all institutes. This isn't unique to NHLBI. And what they're referring to is that, for example, let's say your ESI status expires on June 30th of this year, and you put in an A0 for June 5th, an R01 A0 for submission for June 5th. What they're saying is that if you submit, the typical policy is that if you submit within 13 months the A1, that will be scored as an ESI. For NHLBI, they give you up to 37 months to do that. It used to be, I think NHLBI was the one that actually was really lenient in the past, that they would even honor your ESI status on a competing renewal, but I don't believe they do that anymore. But they historically have had slightly more lenient rules around ESI status. So that's what they're talking about, is that if your ESI status expires sometime after your A0, but before your A1, as long as you submit your A1 within that window, you'll still have the A1 scored as an ESI application. Keep in mind, and I've talked about this in other sessions, that I have had in the past applicants who, for example, let's say their ESI status expires on September 30th, and they think, like, I'm not going to be able to put in that October 5th R01. A program officer once told us that you can upload that October 5th R01 early. So the ESI stamp goes on when you upload. So if you were to upload it on like September 29th and your ESI status expires on the 30th, then it's still an ESI application, even though it's an October 5th deadline and your ESI will have expired by then. So keep putting those questions in there, and let me see what else I had that was emailed to me. Some questions that were emailed. I had an email from a colleague, actually, who was asking me about language that they saw in a NOFO from NIAMS that said, effective with fiscal year 2025 applications, all new and renewal R01 applications in response to the parent R01 will be considered low program priority if the PI has 3 or more active R01 equivalent grants. So that would be like DP1, DP2, DP5, R01, R37, R56, etc. Either funded by NIAMS or another institute or center. The policy will apply to R01 applications from multi-PIs if one of the PIs has 3 or more active R01 equivalent grants. So it applies if any of the PIs have more than 3, with a couple of exceptions. And this colleague was saying, what the heck is this? Have you ever heard of anything like this? And the answer is yes. This is something that I have seen over the years come in and out as a policy at a number of different institutes. Clearly, NIAMS is implementing it for 2025. And you can imagine that the reasoning behind this is that they have had complaints, particularly from junior investigators who say, how am I supposed to break in when there are investigators who have 3, 4, or more R01s? How am I supposed to compete with that? Like I have to be able to land one R01, and you're concentrating all your money into a few discrete labs instead of spreading the wealth around. So many institutes and centers adopt a policy like this or similar. I've seen it, and it comes in and out, so you have to be really careful if you're a person who might fall into this category to check about these policies. And if you can't find language in a given NOFO, to ask a program officer about it. So I've seen it be as few as if you have two R01 or equivalents, that you'll be considered low program priority. This one is 3 or equivalent, and you're low program priority. I've even seen some institutes say we will not accept an application from somebody with X number of R01s or equivalent. So it's just something to think about. May you be so lucky to fall into that category. I think what they're kind of hoping is that people who, obviously it's in response to complaints from junior faculty, but I think they're also thinking, hey, if you fall into that category of having that many R01s, at some point your percent effort on each one is shrinking, and maybe it's time to start thinking about a center grant and think more strategically about the type of application you're putting in. Just something to think about and to be aware of if you might fall into that category. Okay. I had a couple of other questions. I had a category of questions from people who fall into the group of um, K-funded applicants who are gearing up to apply for their first R01. So this is a special type of ESI applicant. It's the K to R applicant, and some organizations have writing clubs that are specific for the K to R group of people. And so I wanted to give some general guidance about the people who are doing the K to R. So if you have a 5-year K, as you likely know, you're not eligible for a release in the percent effort typically until the beginning of year 4. So what that means is that you probably wouldn't even be allowed to submit an R01 until about midway through your 3rd year. And that's predicated on how successful you've been on this case so far. So, and by success, what do I mean by success? It means that you are meeting your training goals on or ahead of schedule, and that you've begun to publish off of your K. And obviously, if those two things are not true, you shouldn't be putting an R01 in, because the thinking is that the best predictor of success on a future grant is success on a past grant. So I would posit that unless you can demonstrate operationally that you have been successful on your K thus far, there isn't a point in putting in the R01. But let's say you have been. One of the things that you want to do is in your personal statement of your bio sketch, and that's one of the things that's going to be changing in the upcoming form set. So this is with the asterisks that this advice is time stamped. You want to play up the fact that you're being very successful on your K, and that you're meeting all the training goals, and talk about what the training goals were and what your progress has been thus far. Talk about any publications that have resulted from the K. Talk about any other grants that you have landed in the meantime. Sometimes some institutes offer an R03 program just for their early K people. So if you're in that situation, you could talk about having landed that. Or if you have applied for foundation funding and landed that, or internal grants, you may want to say that. So the whole point is to talk about how wildly successful you've been on the K, so that you're less of an unknown quantity to the reviewers, because on your first R01, everybody suffers from a credibility problem. So the issue is, on the one hand, you're trying to argue persuasively that your project is worth doing, but maybe the harder thing on a first R01 is to convince reviewers that the application is in the right hands, because things never go the way you think they're going to go. So you have to convince them that you have the intellectual chops to kind of be able to handle these changes as they come up. I would also say that this is a very similar situation for people applying for a competing renewal. So if you've landed your first R01 and you're trying to submit a competing renewal, again, you don't want to submit it until you can show that you've been successful on the initial R01. And what is the operational definition of success? Publications and meeting the aims, what you laid out in the aims. So for a competing renewal, usually what I suggest that people do is in the beginning of the approach, you're going to have a progress report. I like to structure that as a table. And in that table, I list out the aims from the original RO1 in each row. So like aim one, what you said you would do, what your progress is on that aim, and the resulting publications from that aim. And if the publications are in high impact journals, actually write out the name of the journal so that they can see that. And then just list it that way. Each row is an aim. And then reviewers can see very quickly that you have been successful on the previous R1. Because if you're not publishing adequately on the initial R1, you're not going to land another one. So, and I know the next question is going to be what's an adequate number of publications? And that really depends on your field. So for some fields, the type of work they do is very expensive, like large animal work, for example, is very expensive to do. So you might have fewer publications in that kind of work. Whereas if you're doing, I don't know, like statistical modeling, and it's you and maybe a colleague at a computer, you don't have the wet lab expenses there. You may be expected to have more publications. So it's really something you want to talk to mentors about to figure out what is an adequate number of publications for me to realistically think I'm going to land my competing renewal. Okay, so for those who are, I see that more people have joined since we started talking, so feel free. This is strictly a Q&A session. So we have like 5 to 7 minutes left for questions, so feel free to load up the Q&A box. And in the meantime, there's another question that came in. This was from a faculty member of one of our library members. And she said, I'm leading efforts to enhance research among our faculty in our unit. This is a biomedical engineering unit. After talking with colleagues, I noted that an area of support we could use is a short workshop for mid-career senior faculty on strategies for pivoting or transitioning to newer areas of research. So that's the part I really want you to focus on, because your circumstances may be different than this, but lots of people find themselves in a situation where they're pivoting or mentoring people who are pivoting to a new area of research. And basically she just asked, what resources do you have for that? So, and the answers that I gave her, if you're trying to do something new, there are a number of strategies you can take. And everybody on this call has access to my courses. So this isn't a sales pitch. This is just trying to help you understand what courses to look at for this. So within Master the R Series Chapter 1 preparation, there are several units on trying to research a topic in the reporter website to see if NIH is interested in that work and who might be funding it, and trying to pick a NOFO that would fit. And we kind of walk through what those NOFOs are. So a really obvious choice would be the R21, which is in the parent iteration of the R21 is meant for people who are changing career direction or changing, that's too strong a way of phrasing it, changing shifting to a project that they have not developed a lot of data in yet. So the R21 could be really useful for that. In addition, there are a number of mentored K awards that are geared for people who are moving in a new direction who may not be junior faculty. So a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people think the K is for junior faculty, but there are actually some mid-career or later mentored Ks. So one of them is the K18, which is a Research Career Enhancement Award for established investigators. That's to provide full-time or part-time support for experienced scientists who wish to broaden their research capabilities or to make changes in their research careers by acquiring new research skills or knowledge. So that's an option if your target institute participates. The K24 is a mid-career investigator patient-oriented research mechanism to provide support for mid-career clinicians with research support to allow for protected time to devote to patient-oriented research and to serve as mentors for beginning clinical investigators. The K-25 is for quantitative research career development. So that is particularly for people who have quantitative scientific and engineering backgrounds outside of biology or medicine, who have made a commitment to focus their research endeavors on basic or clinical biomedical research, and the K-26 Mid-Career Investigator Award to provide grant support to biomedical and behavioral scientists to allow them protected time to devote to their research and mentorship. And there are others for more senior level people with all different orientations. So you can check out the K kiosk for that. And I have a question in the Q&A box. Can you do a K-18? And the K-18 is the Career Enhancement Award for established investigators if you did a K-01. And I believe the answer is yes. They're geared toward completely different career stages. So I would always check with the program officer at your target institute, but I'm pretty sure that you can do a K-18 if you did a K-01. And then the other things to think about are which I actually didn't include in my answer to this person, but depending on what stage of the career the person is in, for example, if the person is ESI and looking to move in a new direction, they could consider the CATS R01. That's it's funded out of the Common Fund, I believe, the CATS, and you're actually not allowed to report preliminary data. And it's for early stage investigators who are wanting to move into a new direction. So that's CATS, like KATZ. It's named after a person. And there are a couple of, I can't remember if it's the TR01 or the Pioneer Award out of the high risk, high reward portfolio that is also meant for people who are moving in a new direction and don't have data. So there are a number, it's pretty atypical for NIH, where mostly they're very conservative and are often accused of funding next logical steps research, but they do have a couple of mechanisms for people who are looking to change direction and don't have an established track record in the field. Okay, so we have 2 more minutes. If anybody wants to load up any more questions, go ahead and do that now. I'm just looking to see if I had any other questions on my list. I have noticed a lot of people searching our website for the R56 mechanism. I don't know if people have any questions about that, but an R56 mechanism is not something that you can apply for directly. It's if you have applied for an R01 and you have not cleared the funding line, but the program officer really believes in you or your project. They really want to see you come back in a year or two with stronger data and reapply for the R01. It's at their discretion. It's at the program officer's discretion to award you an R56, which is usually 1 to 2 years of funding to help beef up the preliminary data to make your R01 application more competitive. So over the years, I've seen them fall in and out of fashion. Sometimes they just kind of disappear off the face of the earth, and I could go years without hearing of somebody receiving an R56 from a program officer. And then all of a sudden, there'll be people who are receiving them, and searches coming into the website. I wrote an old blog post about an R56, and all of a sudden we're getting lots of hits on the R56 blog post. So just for people who may have questions about that, I've noticed a recent uptick in those queries coming into the website. Really, the take-home message in a more general sense is that your program officer is really incredibly important to your success. And it pays for them to know who you are and know something about your work, and to really believe in you, because they can be a very powerful advocate in advancing your NIH funding. So, in the most general sense, That's the message of the R56, in my opinion. So we are at time. So thank you all for attending. We have 2 more sessions coming up. The next 2 sessions are going to be devoted to Q&A for the Cycle II applications. And then once we get past all of the Q&A, starting on June 12th, we'll begin with some topic-specific tutorials again. And I'll be presenting things like new samples of like team tables and rigor scoring criteria and things like that that are featured in the update to the Master the R series. But I'll be doing little mini tutorials to talk about why I picked those samples and what I like about them right now in terms of being submitting a fundable R01 application. So anyway, I wish you all the best of luck. I hope that your writing is going well. And I'm in it with you. I feel your pain. We're all heading into a very busy month. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Come prepared with your questions. And I thank you all for attending. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.